volumetric displacement effect in Blender using grids in geometry nodes. And don't worry if you are new to Blender or not into geometry nodes, I have turned the entire setup into a free, easy to use modifier with some extra features. You can jump to the timestamp to see that in action or follow along as we build it step by step from scratch. I have this Sultan mesh. Let's turn it into a volume. Make a new geometry node setup. Grab from the group input node and add a mesh to density grid. Increase the density and lower the voxel size. I set it like 0.1. But to properly displace this volume, I need more space around it. I need a domain. So I duplicate the input node, plug a boundary box node and convert that into a density grid as well. This creates a separate grid space we can use for the displacement. Put the same values here. Next, I add a voxel grid node to convert any existing tiles back into voxels. Then I grab from Sultan grid and add a sample grid node. Grab the sample density value from this grid and add it to our bounding box grid using a fill to grid node. We basically have the same thing as before. Also, I put a set grid background node after this. I will get back to why I recreate the volume with a domain. First, let me show you how I can displace this volume. Here we have a socket to manipulate the position of the voxels. By default, it is the small as plugging a position node, but if I add a vector math add node to it, you can see I can offset the Sultan volume inside our bounding box. Now if I skip this bounding box and use Sultan's grid directly, you can see Sultan's shape kinda becomes a mask for its volume. It limits the volume to contain in itself. That's why I had to sample the density and use it in a separate grid. But this space is not enough either. So I add a transform geometry node here and scale up the bounding box. With that, we have a lot of room to move the displacement around. Now I add a noise texture and plug the color output to here. Then I can change the noise texture properties to control the displacement I want to add. Add a scale node to control the amount of displacement, the strength. Play with these settings to get a better displacement. But I don't want the displacement applied everywhere. I want to preserve parts of the original shape. So let's create a mask. I duplicate this noise texture and this group input node. I view it with a noise texture factor. I pick an area I want to displace. Use a color ramp to increase the contrast. I change the texture to 4D to get this W socket to move the mask around. I'm going to keep some recognizable parts and features of Sultan left and displace other areas that are in white. Then add a mix node. Plug the displacement to B socket and plug the mask into factor. Use its output for the vector math add node. Delete these two. I just use them for viewing purposes. Now, when I view this, you can see it keeps black parts and displays volume on the other parts. A bit difficult to see. I can increase the voxel resolution by turning this size down. But be careful, it is very performance heavy, so find a value your PC can handle. I just decrease both these voxel size to something like 0.05. That's enough for the tutorial. Now I can further adjust the displacement. You can see we are only displacing the mask area. Right now this is still a grid. We can't render it yet. We need to convert it into a volume to render or export it somewhere else. So add a store name grid node like this and I call it density. It is important you spell it exactly like this because This is a core attribute when it comes to volumes. Now you can connect this to group output and it will be visible in the render. I am currently in Eevee. I add a light, angle it like this, and in settings enable volume shadows and increase the volume resolution. Set this to like 25. Next, create a material for this. I call it volume. Add a set material node and assign that material. In the shader editor, in volume material, I replace this principal BSTF node with a principal volume BSTF. Plug it to volume. You can see that by default it uses this density attribute to display the volume. If I go back and change this name, it is no longer working. Or you can type that exact name here in the material and it will work again. But I go back to what I had before. To add an extra dimension to this, I like to map a texture into the volume. Add an image texture. I select an abstract pattern texture for this, but we need some kind of a way to map this into volume. So press Ctrl T and let's use these generated or object coordinates. And I can set this to maybe a sphere. Also, put a scale node to adjust the tiling. A proper seamless texture would work better here. This one you can see is not seamless. Anyway, this is okay for some random pattern. But instead of this, I want to use Susanne's UVs for the volume. What I can do is make another grid for storing those UVs. Keep in mind, more grids mean more RAM and performance cost. So if you don't plan on using it, don't bother making a new grid. Add a field to grid node. Plug this into topology. I want a vector grid for UVs. So in the properties panel, node, I remove this input. Select the UV map of Susanne. Add a group input node and sample the nearest surface. I want to sample a vector and plug the UVs into the value. Now this outputs the nearest UVs to the volume. Plug it here and make a new grid. To store it, I duplicate this and call it color. Change to vector. Plug the grid. Back in the material, I unplug this and type the attribute name we just made to here. Now you can see Susanne's UVs map onto the volume. Let's distort these UVs as well. In geometry nodes, I duplicate this mix node with its connections. Keep the factor as it is. Plug the UVs here. I remove this connection and for B, grab from UVs again and add a vector math add node. Then grab the displacement from here and add it. Plug that into B and plug the results here. This will distort the UVs. Too many distortions often didn't look right, so I put a scale node and control the amount of distortion I am adding to the UVs. You can use these UVs for a texture inside the shade editor, but if you prefer, you can even do the texturing directly inside the geometry node. Add an image texture. Select the texture and plug this into the vector. Plug the output color into this vector. Now you can see that the texture is mapped to the volume right inside the geometry nodes. You can put a scale node to control the mapping if you want. We don't need to calculate all this grid stuff every single time we make a change, especially if we are done with the displacement. I can simply put a bake node here and bake the node tree till that point. That way, it won't calculate every single time when I make a change later down the node tree. I hit bake, and when I make a change down the line, it only calculates from that bake node onwards. But what I prefer, when I finalize everything, I can put a bake node right at the end and bake the entire setup. To control where those bake files go, You can either set it up from here or change it from here in the modifier. I delete this initial bake and increase the voxel resolution. Actually, I am not that happy with the density value. So I put a multiply node here and multiply this by something like 10. Hit bake. By the way, this effect works with cycles as well and definitely looks better. Once I finalize the settings regarding the color grid, you can hit bake on this final bake node. If you set this bake method to disk and give a location, Blender will bake the volume and store it as a .vdb file, which you can then grab into a separate Blender file if needed. Without any of these jump to node setup. And that's how we created this volumetric displacement effect from scratch inside Blender. But if you can't be bothered creating your own volumetric displacement setup, then just follow the link in the description and download my pre-made modifier setup. You will get a .blend file like this. In your Blender project, go to File, Append and locate that blend file. Go to node tree and select this node tree. Append it. I want to convert this mesh into a volume. First, make sure it is a closed mesh. Now, in the modifier tab, I find that imported modifier. Immediately, it gives you a warning to make sure your object has a uniform scale and that the voxel size is manageable. By default, it is set to 0.1. Then click enable. Immediately, it converts the mesh into a volume. Here I have added a preview option. You can preview the voxels and change the voxel resolution. You can have one resolution for the viewport and another for the render. I increased the viewport resolution a bit. Disable the preview and you can see my domain is a bit too big for the volume. I can change its size and location from this panel. Pick something that is just enough to contain your volume. Then enable displacement. Here you can have default noise displacement or Voronoi displacement and a few settings to adjust its look. This is great if you want to make some cloud looking volumes. If you like to get a better idea of these settings, you can enable preview for displacement and go to material or render view. This will give you a good visual representation of it. But I like to limit the displacement to a certain area of the mesh. For that, I enable mask. I also enable preview and change to mask. Go to material view and this will give you an idea of where the displacement is applied. Again, you have a bunch of settings to control that mask. Also, you have 3 different mask types: noise texture, sphere mask and texture. In the sphere mask, you can add an empty sphere to the scene and select it from here. Now you can use that sphere to mask out the areas you want to displace. In the texture option, you can input your own texture. I pick something I like, disable the preview and adjust the displacement. Go to render view and add some lights to properly see this volume effect. In Eevee, make sure to enable volume shadows and increase the resolution. This works in cycles as well. I can further adjust the displacement settings. I also added this advec option. This is slow compared to regular displacement, but you might find a look you prefer in there as well. Once I got the displacement I wanted, I further adjust the domain to make it big enough to contain everything I want. Also, I increase the resolution as well. This initial photoscan mesh also had a texture applied to it. I like to use that as volume color, so I enable mapping/textures. This gives me a position vector that has been distorted a bit with the displacement. Enabling this will add a new grid to the volume. You can change their name from here if you want, but I won't bother. Now you can use this vector inside the shader editor. If you enable this texture option, you can assign a texture from right here. But I want the UVs, so enable this, which grab the UVs of the mesh. Make sure you have entered the UV map name here correctly. And just like before, you can enable texture and assign the texture. Like that. Use this to add distortion to the UVs. I like to keep it subtle in most cases. But this is not only for UVs. In this example, I am actually grabbing the vertex color from the initial mesh. Just type the color attribute name and it will map that into the volume. Once you are all done, you can render this with voxel size set in the render resolution. But I like to bake this before the render. For that, go to geometry nodes and find this unmissable green colored frame with a bake node inside. Hit bake. This will bake the volume with the set viewport resolution. This will give you much faster viewport performance. You can also bake this into a separate .vdb file. For that, here in the modifier under manage, find bake. Set it to disk and assign a location. Then I increase the resolution, set the textures like this and hit bake. Now make a new Blender project. Locate that bake folder and you will see a .vdb file. Drag and drop it to the project. And we have that volumetric effect. Make a new material for this and type our color grid name here. The best thing about baking into a separate VDB is you can use it with other programs as well. And that's how I make this volumetric displacement effect in Blender. You can create your own using the free modifier. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial. As usual, project files are available for Patreon members. And I'll see you in the next one.